Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is Technique Tuesday. Many knitters avoid knitting cuff-down socks because they find the Kitchener stitch intimidating or they simply don't like that technique process. In today's video, I'll show you an alternative, the most commonly used method for closing sock toes for centuries up until about World War I, the 3-needle bind-off. So I am getting close to finishing this little swatch of a wedge toe. When I do the 3-needle bind off, I will have to turn the sock inside out. And the way that I'm going to do that is that I'm going to push the sock up through the needles. I'm not going to try to push the needles down through the sock. So if you were using magic loop, where you're using a long circular needle, this can be reasonably easy. You can just slide the sock onto the cable part of the circular needle, and then you can just push this through. If you're working on double pointed needles, especially if you're working on 3, and so those needles are a little more rigid, that can be a little more difficult. So what you might want to do is push the sock up through the opening before you have completed all of the decreases. So I'll show you what I mean right now. I think I have 14 stitches on each needle right now, and I need to keep decreasing until I have 10 stitches on each needle. So I'm going to push my sock up through here now while I still have an opening that's wide enough, and then I'll finish my decreases. I'm going to slide these on to the cables here. I'm going to push the sock through like this. And now the purl side is facing, and what you will see is that the working yarn is hanging down off of my front needle. So the working yarn is always attached to the last stitch that was worked, and when you're working in the round, you always want to work the next stitch. So what I will be doing is working off of the back side of the round. Rather than be working off of the front side like I normally do, I'm going to be working off the back. I'm not changing the direction of knitting. This is the last stitch that was worked, and now this is the next stitch that's going to be worked. I'm just changing which side of this tube I'm working on because it does change once you've flipped it inside out. Okay, so now I'm going to work these last few rounds of decreases. So I will be knitting off of the back needle. The knit side is facing me, so I'm going to be knitting those stitches. So I'm going to be working my decrease now. And again, I'm still working in the same direction around the tube. It just seems like I'm oriented a little bit differently, but I'm still working off of the left-hand needle onto the right-hand needle. I'm still working the next stitch that's in the round. I haven't turned around and gone the other direction. It'll be the same thing if you're on double pointed needles. You're just going to be working off of the back side of the round, but you will still be working off of your left hand double point onto your right hand double point. So I've got all my decreases done, and I need to have each half of the sock, so the instep half on one needle and the sole half on another. So if you have been working on double pointed needles, you need to arrange it so that you have the stitches arranged like this on 2 of your double points. Now what we're going to do, the 3-needle bind off is done by introducing a 3rd needle. It can be very short. I'm using a little glove needle. It's the same diameter as these 2 needles, and I am going to work the first stitch of the front needle together with the first stitch of the back needle. You're going to take your 3rd needle, you're going to enter through that first stitch on the first needle, and then you're going to enter through the first stitch on the back needle. You're going to grab your yarn. Now I'm holding my yarn in my left hand because I'm a continental knitter. That doesn't matter. I'm going to knit these stitches together. If you hold your yarn in the right hand, then you're going to wrap the yarn around your needle just like you would for any knit stitch. And then you're going to pull it through both stitches. Now I like to pull them through one at a time. I'll pull it through the stitch off the back needle, let that come off, and then I pull it off the front needle. You can pull them through both stitches at the same time and then let them both come off at the same time. So I just find it easier to see what I'm doing and making sure that I'm getting through that back stitch by doing them one at a time. But I could pull this through the front if I can do that without managing to lose it off of that needle tip, which I am not certain of. So, like any bind off, once you have 2 stitches on the right hand needle, you are going to pull the first one over the one closest to the tip. And now you're going to work the next 2 together. So again, going through both stitches, I'm going to put the yarn back in my left hand since that's the way I prefer to knit. Going to knit that back stitch, let it off, knit through the front stitch, let that off. So now those 2 stitches have been worked together, they've been joined, and I can bind off this stitch. And I'm just going to continue doing that all the way across. Again, this is a really standard 3 needle bind off. Once you're down to 1 stitch left on the needle, you're going to cut your yarn, leaving like a 4-inch tail, like you would for any bind-off situation. And then you're just going to enlarge that stitch on the needle and then pull that loop out. And then the bind-off is done. This creates a very small ridge on the inside of the work, but if you run your thumbs over it, you can kind of feel that there's something going in a different direction, which is that bind-off chain. But it's really pretty flat. If you look at it from this side, you can see that there's just this little ditch in here, which is like a regular seam line. But it is not a bulky finish at all to this toe. If we compare it to a grafted toe, so this is just going to feel like the fabric has continued across where they were joined, and you're not going to have any sort of ridge inside. But for this one, it's very minor. And the finer the yarn and the smaller the stitches, the less noticeable that ridge is going to be. So let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of doing a 3 needle bind off versus doing a graft. With a 3 needle bind off, you don't have to cut the yarn, thread it onto a yarn needle, and then pass the yarn tail through all of the live stitches that you have. You can just work your bind off until you're done and then measure off a tail and cut it. So you don't have to estimate any tail length. You're not going to worry about running out. Another advantage is that if you are concerned about the recipient of this sock feeling this ridge inside there, that it's going to be uncomfortable, you can have them try the sock on. Don't weave in your yarn tail yet. Leave it hanging. Have them wear the sock around for a while and see if they notice it. Walk around barefoot, walk around with shoes on, and see if they can feel it and if it's uncomfortable. And if it is, then you can take this bind off chain, you can undo it and rip it, just rip it out, and then recapture the stitches, and then close the toe with a graft. You do not have to use Kitchener stitch. That is one technique for creating a graft. There are other techniques that don't require live stitches, which is the toe chimney method. Or you can use the Finchley graft, which is a simpler process than Kitchener. It also requires being on the wrong side of the work while you're working. So if you pulled this out and you put them back on the needles, then you would already be in position to work the Finchley graft. And I will leave links to both of those grafting techniques down in the video description. But even if you want to graft, you do not have to do the Kitchener stitch technique. You have other options. One of the disadvantages is just that little ridge. And if you are knitting for somebody who is very sensitive to things against their feet, this may not be a good solution. Like if you knit for somebody who has diabetic neuropathy, this may not be a good solution for them. But it's always something that you could try and you can pull out if necessary, but then you'll know if it's comfortable or not for you, and you can decide if you prefer this technique over grafting or other techniques for closing your sock toes. I mentioned at the start of the video that the 3-needle bind off was used to close sock toes. Like, it was the most common method for centuries prior to about World War I. This is a replica of a 17th century stocking that I knit a few months ago, and it uses a 3-needle bind off for both the end of the toe, but also for the most common type of heel that was knit at that time, which was called a common heel. And so there would have been a 3-needle bind off at the bottom of the heel too. So I wasn't convinced that this would at all be comfortable. And so I knit this so that it would fit my foot. And when I tried it on, I was really surprised that it was comfortable, and I could see why people would have used this for centuries. But I could also understand why, if you had very sensitive feet, it could be a problem. Not something to be afraid of or highly suspicious of, but something to experiment with and see for yourself whether you think this is a technique worth adding to your toolbox. In knitting, there are always multiple ways of getting to the same endpoint, and that includes closing the toe of a cuff-down sock. If you're interested in exploring other options for sock toes, I have an entire playlist of sock toe videos right over here. I also have a number of videos on uses for the 3-needle bind off and variations on that technique that you can check out over here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.